Hi, I'm Raine Emery, and this is a sewing tutorial for pattern 3603. Here we have Simplicity pattern 3603, and if you take a look on the back, on this flap up here are the sizes, and I'm going to be making mine out of size 12, and then here are the suggested fabrics, the notions, including the notions for the wings, and here is the amount of fabrics you'll need, and I'll be working with size 12 here, so it'll be all the way down here, and then the finished garment measurements if you want to use that as a reference. We have pattern pieces 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here, and this is all going to make up the bodice. We have 3 layers of each, so we have a fabric layer, we have an interlining layer, and we have a contrast layer, also known as the lining. So like I did in my other tutorials, I'm going to work on just 1 layer, and then we're going to repeat that on the other 2 layers. And the first layer that I'm going to work on is the interlining, because that's what I did in my previous 2 tutorials. So I'm going to set all these aside for now. So for the center front, we are going to stitch a stay stitch 1 inch on either side of this dot. Okay, I added that stay stitch through the dot 1 inch on either side, and now we're going to bring out the middle front, set this right side up, and matching the single notches, we are going to place this right sides together, pin all the way down on this side and on this side, and then we're going to stitch down 5/8 of an inch. Okay, I just finished pinning it, and now we're going to stitch it down. Awesome, we have that sewn on. So now, since there are 2 single notches up here, we're going to look at this lower notch. And from this point all the way to the top, we're going to trim about to 1/4 of an inch. I just usually do half of the seam. Like that. And now we are going to clip the curves, just so it's easier for us to press open and for it to lay nice and flat. And now we're going to take it to the ironing board, and we are going to press the seam open, and we're going to repeat on the other one. We have that all nice and pressed. Now we're going to flip it right sides up, and bringing out the side front, we're going to find those double notches, the side with the double notches, and we are going to place it right sides together on this side and on that side. And again, we're going to match the notches, pin, and then sew down 5/8 of an inch. Like this, and then we're going to sew down. The middle front and the side front have been sewn, so now we're going to clip this curve right here, and then we are going to press it open. That seam has been pressed, and now we are going to flip this right sides together, again matching notches. I am pinning from the dot that we had a stay stitch through to the bottom, and we are going to stitch starting at that dot, reinforcing, and all the way down to the bottom, pressing the seams open. Now that the center front has been stitched down from the dot to the end and pressed open, we're going to set that aside, and we're going to bring out the back and the side back. Again, right sides together, we are going to find the side with the double notch and the double notch here, and we're gonna match that up, pin it, and now we're gonna sew that seam down 5/8. Now that we have the back and the side back seams sewn and clipped and pressed open, we can pull out the front pieces again, and we are gonna find the side seam on each of these pieces, place it right sides together, matching notches, and we are going to repeat what we've done and pin and stitch down 5/8 of an inch, bring the curves and pressing it open. Stitching down these 2 side seams here. Woohoo! All of those seams are now stitched together and pressed open. So we're at the point now where we can repeat the full amount of steps that we've done on the other 2 layers, the fabric layer and the lining layer. And I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and I will see you right back here afterwards. Alright, I'm back, and all 3 layers have been sewn. So the lining or the contrast, the interlining, and the fabric. So the next step that we're going to do is we are going to pull out the interlining again and set aside the lining and the fabric. So now we are going to create the channels for the boning. So for the side back, I am going to use 5/8 inch twill tape and place that or stitch that down in the middle of it on the edge. The pattern instructions have a way where you can use a strip of remnant fabric, and you can take a look at that if you'd rather do that. I have this twill tape on hand, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it's about halfway in between pattern 5, which is the side back. Then I'm going to pin that down, and I'm going to repeat on the other side. Okay, there's that. And then the rest of the boning channels will be created with the seams that we already have. And so we will stitch down on each seam 3/8 inch away from each side of the seam. So on this side and on this side, all the way down, except for the side seam of this part. This part you will stitch down, this part you will not. For the center front and middle front seams, you will only create a boning channel up to where you started trimming off for the bust area. And then for the center front, you are going to mark a 1/2 inch beneath the dot, and you are going to sew up to that point and square it off and then go back down. You're going to go sew up, across, and down. All right, all of those boning channels are sewn. And if you see here, I left this one unsewn. So this is a side seam. And then I've stitched down the twill tape as well that we added. So now we're gonna add in the cups for the bust. What we're gonna do is we're gonna find the most curved part of the bust and we're going to fit it in like so. And I like to lay it flat like this and just add a couple pins all the way around. And this is why we did not add a stitching line right here. The bust cup will overlap on here. You can tell that this is going to overlap the seam allowance. So we are going to ultimately trim this down at least to the 5/8 inch mark. I might do a little bit more just so it doesn't interfere with sewing. Then you're going to repeat this on this side and make sure that it's even. You can measure it if you need to. Okay, and I marked about 1 inch to like 3/4 away from the front seam right here, and I'm just gonna trim this down. And now what we're gonna do is we're going to take a zigzag stitch and stitch it all the way around the bust cup on the edge of it. And now it's time to add the boning. So I have a 1/4 inch spiral steel boning here, and I have boning caps as well. So for each channel that we have sewn, we are going to measure the length of it, and then we are going to subtract 1.5 inches from that, and then repeat that for every full channel. For the channels underneath the bust and the center front, you are only going to subtract the boning 3/4 of an inch instead of 1.5 inches, because we do not have to worry about the top here. Okay, so I have already put all the boning on this side in, and now we're just going to insert the rest of the boning. And after adding all those in, I have also cut out and added boning caps to 2 more, the length of the center back minus about 1.5 inches. And we're gonna set those aside for now, but we will use these later. So at these top channels right here, we're gonna stitch a 1/2 inch basting stitch right here and up here to close off the channels. And then all along the bottom here, we are going to stitch a 1/2 inch the boning channels. Okay, I basted the tops and the bottoms of the boning channels closed. And so now we're going to bring back the fabric layer. And at the point where we did the back stitch and where the dot is on the center front seam, we are going to clip to, but not through that point there, like that. Now we're gonna flip the interlining right side up, and then we're gonna take the fabric layer wrong side down. We're gonna place it on top of the interlining, and we are going to pin all the way around and add a basting stitch on all sides of the interlining and the fabric layer. And I also added a clip on the interlining like what we did on the fabric layer, so it can fit well together like that. Now we're just gonna pin it. Okay, that is all pinned down, and now we are going to stitch all the way around 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge, including to these flaps right here. And now we are going to pull out our inset front, and I have everything marked on here, and we're gonna fold it so that wrong sides are together and right sides are out. And then we're gonna pin it, and then we're gonna add a basting stitch on each side 3/8 of an inch. I basted and pressed the front inset, and now we're gonna bring back our fabric and interlining layer. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna baste it again, but attach it to the V here. So I'm gonna flip it around, matching the small dots at the top, the notches on the side, and the one large dot at the bottom here. And we're gonna pin the sides all the way down. All right, and now once we have that pinned all down, we're gonna sew each side separately with a basting stitch, probably like 3/8, quarter of an inch away. All right, we have that basted, and I just want you to take a look at what it looks like on the outside. It's looking so good. So now we're going to start attaching the lining, and to do that, we're going to do something similar that we did with this part right here. And we are going to take our lining, and with right sides together, we are also going to match up the small dots, the notches, and pin it down. And we're going to pin it all the way down to match up with the big dot. And when we stitch it, we are going to stitch down 5/8 of an inch, and we are going to break the stitch at the dot, and then we're going to repeat the same process on the other side with the lining. It's looking pretty dang good. And now we're going to understitch the lining. So we're going to run a stitch that's pretty close to this seam right here, only on the lining and the seam that we just made. I have pressed the inset down on both sides, and the understitching is looking pretty dang good. The next step, I've already done it on this side. We are going to create another boning channel, which will be stitched 3/8 of an inch away from the seam. And what we're going to do is we are going to fold the lining away from where we're going to stitch, and then we're going to fold back down, making sure that this seam is folded down because we're going to be stitching on this seam. We are going to stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the fabric edge here all the way to the top, making sure to square near the dot at the bottom right here. And then when you're done, it'll look something like this on the other side. So this is what it should be looking like now. So I have not sewn the boning channel on the lining. It is just sewn onto this layer of the fabric and the interlining. And now we get to add the grommets here, so we can start adding the faux lacing. Again, we are going to move the lining out of the way. So we're just focusing on the fabric and interlining layer. And we're either going to use embroidery scissors and awl, or if you'd like a challenge, this one, because it's hard to reach all these points, or you can use all of them together interchangeably. But we are going to create the holes for the grommets, and then we're going to insert the grommets. And now we get to insert more boning into this channel that we made here. So I'm going to measure down from this top here, the channel, to where we squared off at the bottom here. And I'm going to subtract 3/4 of an inch, add the 2 boning caps on either side, and we're going to insert that and repeat on the other side. And now we're going to add a little bit of pizzazz to this before we add the lacing. I have this cool trim here that looks kind of like snowflakes, which I think is perfect. And so we're going to pin it here at the edge of the inset seam, and we're going to pin it down there, and then we're going to fold it back up like that, and then we're going to hand stitch that down. Now that I have that sewn on, I have cut 2 pieces of ribbon that are 30 inches long, and you can also use any kind of cording that you want to for this, as long as it fits. And we are going to start with these 2 pinned at the bottom here. We are going to eventually tack this down. If you want to do that now, you can. I'm just gonna pin it right here for now. And then we're gonna start threading the ribbon through the lowest grommet, and then we're going to flip it to the outside, and then we're going to just start threading it through all the other grommets. This diagram right here is super helpful, so if you need more of a concrete reference than just watching me do it, then that is there for you. So now I'm going to take this and thread it through here, making sure that there are no wrinkles or twists in the ribbon. And then I'm going to thread it up here. Now when we've brought it to this grommet right here, I'm just going to pin up right here at the raw edge like that, and then we're going to do the other side. All right, and once you've made it to this point, you are going to even it out and fix any tugs or any twisted ribbons or cords. And I'm also going to make sure to even it out to give enough space for the inset to lay properly when it's on the body. And then after that, I'm going to tack down the ribbon here, here, and then where we started right here. That's looking pretty good. So now we're going to finish the back edge by stitching the lining and the fabric and interlining layer right sides together. And it might seem a little bit difficult, but the way that I figured out how to do it is I just flip out the lining like this, working one side at a time, and then I pin all the way down. And then we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew 5/8 down here, and then we're going to trim the seam, flip it out, and press it. That has been sewn 5/8. Now we're going to just trim it down a bit. And then we're going to flip it right side out, so it's a finished back seam right there. And then we're going to press this seam right here, and then press it so it lays flat like that. And now I'm just going to pin it down, and then we're going to do what we did here on the other side. All right, I repeated that process on the other side, so both of them are ready to go. And on each of the back seams that we just worked on, we're going to stitch from the edge 3/8 of an inch all the way down to create the back boning channel. And now there's a boning channel on each back edge, and we're going to pull out the boning that we created earlier for the back, and we are going to slip that through the channel. Now you can stitch on the top and the bottom of those channels to close them off. So next, before we insert the grommets, we are going to pin the lining to the interlining and fabric layer along the top edges and the bottom edges, and then we're going to stitch 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. I have it all pinned, so we're going to baste the bottom all the way to the end, and then we're going to baste this point up to where we added the trim, and starting again where we added the trim on the other side to the back. that is all nice and basted together, this is what the other side looks like. And now I'm gonna add the grommets. So I have the grommet points already marked out on each back edge. So because it's on an edge, I can use this tool, but if you just have an awl or embroidery scissors, you can use that as well. Now that those grommets are in, we're going to set this aside and we're going to pull out pattern 11, which is the armhole ruffle. I'm going to set this on top of this because the fabric that I'm working with is kind of sheer and I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So we're going to start out with pressing the lower curved edge 5/8 of an inch upward. And once we press that down, we're going to fold that raw edge in towards the crease to create a narrow hem. And then we're going to stitch on the inside of that fold. Okay, I pressed the curved part 5/8 of an inch, and something that helped was adding a basting stitch all the way around 5/8 of an inch, and then I just folded on that stitching line and pressed it down. Now we're going to take the raw edge and fold it into the crease, press, and then stitch along that inner folded edge. Okay, so that turned out pretty good. And now on the straight edge, we are going to press towards the wrong side again, 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to do the trick that I did before, and I'm going to stitch down 7/8, and I'm going to fold on that stitching line. And now with that folded edge, we are going to fold in towards the crease 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to stitch close to this inner edge fold right here, and that will be our casing for the elastic. So now pulling out guide 12, we are going to grab the elastic that we cut from this guide, and in each one we are going to add this through the channel. And the way that I like to do it is with a safety pin. Just start threading it through. When the elastic gets close to the edge, I'm going to pin that edge just so it doesn't slip all the way through and ruin our work. All right, and once we get it out on the other edge, I am going to pin it down, remove the safety pin. I'm going to even the gathers out a little bit. If you want to stitch the gathers down in the middle here just to make sure that they stay in one spot, just make sure that the elastic can stretch afterwards. So the next step is to add this to the bodice about right here, but I am going to be a little bit extra and I'm going to add this trim to the bottom here. So I'm going to start stitching where this guy is right here and just go all the way down, and hopefully it works out. It actually didn't turn out too bad. It's really pretty. So now we're going to add the sleeve onto the bodice, and I'm just gonna quickly trim off these edges. I have the elastic ending where the dot is, and then on the dots on the upper bodice, we're going to match them up here. So this is on the middle front and side front seam up here, and this is close to the side back and back seam, and we are going to pin that down, and then we're going to stitch across these two 1/4 of an inch to tack them down. You guys, it's so pretty. Okay, now we're going to work on bias binding the edges. So the bias bindings that are going to go on the top and the bottom are pattern pieces 7 and 8. So 7, there are 2 of these pieces. These are going to be the upper binding, and 8 is just one long continuous piece, and that is going to be the lower binding. And I have already prepped the bias tape with my handy dandy little bias tape maker because I like to do that beforehand. The instructions do say that you can do it while you're putting it on the bodice itself. And what we're going to do is, with a little bit of overlap so that we can fold it in later, we are going to pin this right side to right side of the lining side. So we are going to stitch in this first inner groove right here, or if you were using the pattern instructions, you are going to sew 3/8 from the raw edge here, and then you are going to press it up, and you're going to stitch all the way down here, up here, and over towards the inset, making sure not to stitch the inset itself. So after stitching it on this side, you're going to fold it over, and because I already have the fold in there, it's pretty nice. You just get to press it over like that, matching to the basting stitching line. and you're gonna pin. So for the ends, you can either fold it, when we fold it over, you can fold it in and then down, or you can fold this on right sides together of the bias binding like that, pin it, and then sew right along the edge here. And this method is going to be super helpful for the front right here because it is on an angle. So you are going to, with the seam pressed up, fold it down, pin it, and then you're going to stitch along the line that follows the inset seam, so right along the edge. And now that we have it all pinned and ready to go, we are going to stitch right along the edge here. Now that the top bias binding is sewn all along the top edges, we are going to bring out number 8, and we are going to repeat the same exact process just all along the bottom here. So we're going to start off with the back here, and yeah, I'll see you back here once I finish that. Okay, the bias binding is all completely sewn on, and that's what it looks like on the inside. So now what we're going to do is we are going to add trim along the bias binding that we made on the outside using the snowflake trim again because it's pretty. So I'm going to pin it all along the bias binding edges, folding it at the ends and going along the top here, and then I'm going to do that along this bias binding, and the bottom bias binding. Now that that's done, we're going to set that aside and we're going to bring out the back panel, the underlap, or the modesty panel, whatever you want to call it. And I have already basted around the edges of one of the contrasts with the interlining, and I am going to place it right sides together with the other one, and then we are going to pin all the way around here, leaving this left side open, and then we're going to stitch 5/8 of an inch all the way around here. Okay, that has been sewn and this side is left open. And now we're going to trim around it and making sure to clip the corners here. And now we're going to flip it right side out, and then we're going to go take it to the iron and press it all down nice and flat. And then on that opening side, we are going to baste down along the edge 1/4 of an inch, right along this edge. That side has been basted down, and now I'm going to bring out the back binding for 10, and I already have it prepared again. So we are going to pin this down, right sides together all along the edge. You know the drill, stitch 3/8 of an inch away, and then we're going to fold it over, and on each end you are going to finish it by either folding it or flipping it around and stitching it the way that I showed you earlier. And then after that, we are going to finish it off by stitching near the edge on the other side. All right, that is all done and ready to be sewn in, and we're going to set that aside for a minute while we pull out the bodice again. So we are going to insert the panel, the back panel, onto the back here on this side, and there are 2 dots here and there are 2 dots on the back panel. We're just going to match it on either side here. You're going to pin it, and then you're going to slip stitch along this edge from this point to this point. All right, and now we are just about done with the bodice, unless you want to add in any more appliques or trims to the front, which you are more than welcome to. You know my thoughts on that. And now we are going to add the back lacing. So I have cut a ribbon that is about 104 inches, and we are going to start threading it through the top and crisscross all the way down. Now we get to work on the skirt, which has pockets, and I have the 2 fronts here. So we have cut 4 in total, so 2 fronts, 2 backs, all out of the same pattern. And on each of the 4 pattern pieces, I have run a stay stitch about 3/8 of an inch on the top curve here. And now on the center front seam, we are going to match right sides together with the notches matching. We're going to pin it down, and then we're going to stitch all the way down 5/8 of an inch. So I've sewn down the seam and I finished it by serging and trimming it down. So I also pressed it just to one side. Either side really doesn't matter. But if you wanted to finish it in other ways, like a French seam or using pinking shears or zigzag stitching it and pressing it open, that's totally okay. Do what works best for you. So now we're going to add the pockets. So right side facing up, we're gonna take pattern piece 14, which looks like Squidward's nose, and we're going to, on the side seam, we're gonna find the two big dots, which I've marked right here, and I'm gonna take pattern piece and right sides together. I'm gonna match up the dots on here with the dots on this pattern piece, which should be these two spots right here. And I'm gonna place it right sides together, matching those dots right there and pinning it down. There's also a notch here to help you out. I'm gonna repeat this on the other side. And then I'm gonna set aside the two center fronts and pull out the two center backs. And on the part of the back that is a side seam and not the center back, we're gonna find those two large dots again and do the same thing. Right sides together, matching dots and the notch. And repeat on the other one. Okay, and on each of these pocket pieces, we are going to stitch down from the top to the bottom 3/8 of an inch. So again, from the top here to the bottom here, 3/8 of an inch. All right, and now that that is sewn, we are going to take this to the iron and press it out on the seam here. And then we are going to understitch this close to the seam on the pocket piece. All right, so I have it pressed. So I'm going to understitch on this pocket seam with the seam pressed towards the pocket. Just like that. So I have each individual pocket piece sewn on with right here understitched. So now what we're gonna do, this is the side front seam right here, and we're gonna take one of the skirt back pieces and match it right sides together on the skirt front side seam. And then we're gonna match it all together. We're gonna sew down 5/8 down here, around here, back, and then all the way down. And now I'm gonna finish the seam. I'm going to serge it because that's usually how I finish seams. It's easy, it's quick. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna serge basically just the whole route that we already sewed down. But for the corners here, I'm just gonna clip in. So when I'm serging it, I can just open it up. And when I'm done, I'm going to press this seam towards the front so the pocket is facing towards the front. If you are doing an open seam, make sure to check step 38 on the paper instructions. So after it is pressed, this is what the pocket should look like. Good job. So now I have it attached to the hanger with pins, and I'm going to leave that hanging overnight because the bias of the skirt will stretch, and to even it out afterwards will make the garment look so much cleaner and nicer. So I'm going to do that, and then we can work on the ruffles. So now we're going to move on to the ruffles, and we're going to start with the lower ruffle, which is ruffle 4. So we have 19, 20, and 21. 19 is the front ruffle, and we are going to sew that side seam here to the side seam of the side ruffle 4. Right sides together, 5/8 of an inch, and then after that we're going to sew the other side seam of the side ruffle 4 to the side seam of back ruffle 4, matching the notches right sides together and sewing 5/8 of an inch as well. And then after that we're going to trim the seams down about 1/4 of an inch, and then we'll press it all towards the back. All 4 seams are sewn and trimmed down and pressed towards the back, and now we get to sew the center front together. So this angled piece right here, and we're going to place it right sides together again, matching notches. And once we have the notches matched, we're going to sew down here 5/8 of an inch and trim it down and press towards the back like we did with the other seams. The center front seam has been sewn, and I've also added 2 gathering stitches at the top that we will be gathering and attaching to the skirt. So what we're going to do before we start attaching this to the skirt is we are going to add a narrow hem to the end here at the bottom. And what I have done, you can't really see because I've used a matching thread, is add about 1/4 inch stay stitching basting stitch at the bottom here, and then fold it up, press it along that stitching line, so press it about 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to fold it again and press it if you'd like, and we're going to stitch on the inside of the fold right here. So before we start attaching the ruffle, I have pulled back out the skirt that I have left to hang overnight so that the bodice could stretch, and then I placed it on the dress form with the hoop skirt and laid out the skirt pattern piece on top of it, matched it up so I could see how much excess on the bottom I needed to cut off, and I marked it. So we can go ahead and trim that off so it is all even. And after we trimmed it off on each section, we are going to take it over to the ground in order to attach the ruffle. I have the skirt here thrown onto the ground just because that is the most space that I have. But if you have a table that is pretty big, use that instead of the ground because your back will thank you. So there should be 2 lines circling on the upper part of the skirt. We are going to place ruffle 4 on the lower line. So on the gathering stitches, I have done one gathering stitch at 3/8 and another gathering stitch at 5/8, so I know where to stitch. So I'm going to place the 5/8 line down onto the lower line from the pattern. I'm going to start off with center front. I'm going to take that 5/8 line and I'm going to place it on the lower line from the pattern. And then I'm going to pin that. So we have right sides together and the hem is going this way. And we are going to pin all the way around after we've gathered, making sure not to pin the pocket. The pocket seam is close to where we will be sewing, so just make sure to avoid that. And if you need to pin it up, you can. I am going to pin the center back, matching up the raw edge. And then I'm going to gather and I'm going to match up that line of the 5/8 with the lower line on the pattern all the way around. This takes some time, so set some time aside for this. Ta-da! It's all pinned on. Now we're gonna sew all the way around at 5/8, so on that one gathering seam that I stitched at 5/8, making sure to avoid the pockets. Okay, that ruffle is all sewn on, and I have just left the raw edge out, but if you want to finish it in any way, like serging it or zigzag stitching the edge, you can totally do that, but since this fabric doesn't fray, I'm not too concerned. You can also trim it down as well, but now we're going to set this aside and work on ruffle 3. We have patterns 17 and 18 here, so this is the front ruffle 3 and the back ruffle 3, and so we're going to do something similar that we did to ruffle 4, and we're going to stitch right sides together, this side to the side seam of the back ruffle 4, and we're going to sew that down 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to trim it down and press the seam towards the back. Okay, now that we have those 2 side seams sewn, this one right here and this one right here, we're going to sew the center front together and place this on top of this, right sides together, matching notches, and we are going to sew down 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to trim it and press it to the back like we did with ruffle 4. The front is all sewn together, and I also added 2 gathering stitches at the top, one at 5/8 and one at 3/8, and then I also added a narrow hem at the bottom, so now we are ready to add it to the skirt. So like with ruffle 4, there is another line up here. We are going to match the 5/8 gathering stitch onto that line, and we're going to stitch down on that line all the way around. Whew, okay, we got that pinned, and again we are going to stitch down on that 5/8 line, that 5/8 gathering line, and we are going to make sure to avoid the pockets. And after we've done that, again, if you'd like to finish the seam in whatever way you'd like, you can, but I will go sew that and I'll be right back. Something that I forgot to do, and I should have mentioned earlier, is on the center back, you are going to baste this down and make sure that you measure from the bottom so that at the ends here, these will flip over, and when we sew it together, it'll match up just nicely. We have pattern 16, which is ruffle 2. We're going to do what we did on the other ones, except we only have one seam here that we need to join together, which is the center front, and that is going to be sewn 5/8 of an inch, and we're going to trim it down and press it towards the back like we did with the other ruffles. And then after that, we are going to add a narrow hem at the bottom and add the 2 gathering stitches at the top. Okay, now that ruffle 2 is all ready to go and ready to attach to the skirt, we're gonna set it aside, bring out the skirt, and now we are just going to attach the top raw edge of the ruffle to the top raw edge of the skirt, matching center front to center front. matching the small dot on the ruffle to the side seam of the skirt, and matching center back the ruffle to the center back of the skirt. Also pinning down at the bottom because you will baste all the way down here. And then you are going to use the gathering stitches to adjust it and to make it fit to the skirt. All right, now that that is all ready to go, we are going to baste here at the top. I'm probably going to baste about like 1/2 inch. And I'm also going to baste down here on the center back seam and also on the center back seam on the other side. Woohoo! Okay, so we have ruffle 2 sewn on, and now we get to sew on the last ruffle. So that is ruffle number 1. So this is pattern 15, also known as ruffle 1, and we are going to repeat the same exact steps that we did on ruffle 2. And I will be back here once we finish that. So that is all sewn down, and we are ready to attach the skirt to the waistband. So on the unmarked side, I folded it down 5/8 of an inch, and we are going to use that later. It'll help out. So now we are going to add more gathering stitches to the top of the skirt. So from here all the way over to here, and then we are going to gather it to fit the waistband. Now that I've added gathering stitches to the top of the skirt, I'm going to gather it to fit the waistband. And first I'm going to start pinning center front to the center front of the skirt, right sides together, and then I'm going to match up these 2 dots with the side seams, and then I'm going to match up the center backs. And now I'm going to take the gathering stitches and just start gathering it to fit. That is all pinned, and before we sew, I'm going to trim down this folded part of the waistband about 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to sew 5/8 from this point all the way down to that point. Huzzah! We have sewn it all on, and now we're gonna trim this seam right here just to make it less bulky. Something that I like to do to reduce the bulk is to angle the scissors while cutting it about a 45-degree angle. Now we're gonna take it to the ironing board, and we are gonna press the seam up towards waistband. Okay, we have the waistband seam pressed up, and now we're going to prep for inserting the zipper. So we are going to find the notch on the back skirt seam. So mine is right here. And we're going to measure down 3 inches, and we're going to make a mark, and then I'm going to pin it to the other center back. Right sides together. You're going to pin that point that we just marked all the way down to the edge of the skirt, so the end of the skirt, and then you're going to stitch down 5/8 of an inch and make sure to reinforce at the mark that you made, and then I'll see you right back here. I have sewn that seam from the point that we made all the way down to the bottom of the skirt, and I pressed it open, and I also serged it and I made sure to match it up with each ruffle as close as I could get it. And then I added basting stitch 5/8 of an inch all the way down to the point of the opening of the back of the skirt, and we are going to use this as a guide for adding the zipper in. So for the zipper, I like to press the coils open of the invisible zipper before inserting it, so making sure to press it on a low heat so it doesn't melt coils. I have marked the halfway point of the waistband right here, halfway point of it on the short side, and I'm going to mark 1/8 of an inch right below that, and that's where our zipper stopper is going to be. I'm going to do that on the other side. I have the zipper here, and I'm going to take this side and fold it out like this. So when we sew it to the back center seam, it's going to fold out like that. And we're going to match this top zipper stopper with the mark that we just made and with the stitching guideline that we did with 5/8 of an inch. And then just start pinning down, making sure to match where you will stitch. So I'm going to stitch like right along the edge of the coils, and I'm going to match that with the basting line that I made that is 5/8 of an inch. Okay, that is pinned down, and since I do not have an invisible zipper foot, I do have a zipper foot. And the way that I like to do it is I like to stitch down a basting stitch just to keep it in place, kind of in the middle of the tape. And then I like to go in again and get as close as I can to the coils without stitching on them. So we're going to do that at the top here at the zipper stopper all the way down to the point where the seam opens. Okay, I have my zipper foot on, and we are going to go ahead and start basting all the way down. And now we're going to go back in close to the edge of the coils. Now I'm gonna zip it up for the next part, and before we attach the other side, we're gonna mark where the seam is of the waistband and where the ruffles end, so that we can match up these points with the ends of the ruffles and the seam line on the other side so it matches up really nicely. I'm gonna unzip that, and then we are gonna pull like we did with the other side. We are gonna flip it out, and then we're going to match up those points. Also matching up the top stopper with the mark that we made. And then we're going to repeat what we did on the other side, just going the other way. That one is now sewn, so we got to take the zipper and flip it through. I'm going to make sure to keep the zipper stopper up because that will be very helpful in bringing it out. And we're going to start zipping it up and see how we did. And if you are using tulle like I am, or any kind of delicate fabric, be careful when zipping it up because it can rip, and it has ripped for me before, so learn from my mistake. Look at that invisible zipper! Good job! And now we're going to finish the waistband. Opening the zipper back up, we are going to take the folded edge and we are going to place it on the seam of the waistband and the skirt. And we are going to pin that, and then we're going to stitch just along this part a 1/2 inch, and then we're going to clip just this corner right here. When you are sewing, do your best to make sure that the zipper teeth are out of the way so you don't accidentally sew them. Once we've got that done, we are going to take the folded edge of the waistband and fold it onto the seam line of the waistband and the skirt, and we're going to pin that. And we're going to continue to pin all the way around the waistband, and then we're going to slip stitch it closed. And that is what it looks like when it is all pinned. The waistband has been successfully slip stitched closed, and I'm gonna take it to the ironing board and I'm gonna just press it down so there is a crease and it lays flat. And if you wanted to add a top stitch at the top right here, you're more than welcome to. And then after we take it to the iron, we are going to add a hook and eye at the very top of the zipper. And here is the part of the skirt that's going to take the longest, the lower ruffle. Yay! So this is pattern 22, and how we're going to start is we are going to, with all of the fabric that you cut, oh my gosh, there's a lot. This is going to take some time, I'm going to warn you right now. It's taken me a lot of time and I get to do it again, so don't worry, you're not alone, I'm with you on this one. What we're going to do is we're just going to start sewing them all together in a gigantic circle and start sewing shorter sides, right sides together, making sure to match up the notches. And then we're going to sew each of them 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to trim it down and press it open. And if you're working with fabric that likes to fray, you can finish it in any way that you'd like. Okay, there is so much here. I've added the gathering stitch at the top and I have hemmed it, the narrow hem, so we're good to go to attach that onto the skirt. Okay, I got the skirt laid out, I got the ruffle here, and the way that I'm going to attach it and match it up is what we have on the pattern piece here. So on the center front and the center back seams, we're going to attach it to the center of one of the panels of the ruffles, and then we're going to attach the side skirt seam to the side seam of the ruffle and pin it all down, and then we'll sew it 5/8 of an inch. So we are now going to sew all the way around in the circle 5/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to serge the seam and then press the seam up. Now that the ruffle is attached to the skirt, we are now going to attach the trim and make it look pretty. Also, this is completely optional, but I've decided to kind of last minute add some trims to the ends of the ruffles, and I think this will help, especially with this one, because I am using very sheer light fabric that some of the layers will show through. I kind of want to mask that a little bit, so adding little things like this will help. Okay, so the skirt is done and I have my hoop skirt here. The bottom circumference is about 160 inches. And I'm also gonna throw on the petticoat over it that I made a while ago. I use this for like every single ball gown project. Just helps to hide some of the hoops when we throw on the skirt. This is what the skirt ended up looking like, and I think the trim was a good call. I also tacked down each point right here on the center front seam just so it lays evenly. And now it's time to make the wings. So I have 24, 25, 26, and 27 all here, and I'm gonna move these three aside for now, and we're just gonna focus on the frame guide. So I have 12 gauge wire, and I also have 14 gauge wire. The 12 gauge wire will be the main frame, so it'll wrap around the U up here and over to the end up here. The 14 gauge will also wrap around the U, and then it will follow these two as well. And then we will use electric tape to put it all together. Okay, let's start out with the 12 gauge. If you ever made fairy wings, you know the drill. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to start from here over here. We're gonna go up, and I'm gonna make sure that there's extra so I can copy this side on the other side, so it's just a U right here. That way there's more stability and structure. And you can also use pliers to help out with the bending process. That is more like it. And now we are gonna follow up the wing and onto where I showed you. Ooh, there we go. All right, so that is looking pretty accurate. So now I'm gonna fold over this edge right here. And if it's too hard for you to fold with pliers, you can use a boning cap and just stick that onto the end. So this is what it looks like on the other side. And I folded down the edge here. And now we're gonna repeat this one more time so we have 2 of these in total. Okay, now we have both frames made, and I did pinch myself with the pliers, so be careful. So eventually, once we combine them together, it'll go like this. This is what it'll look like when it's together, minus the other 2 veins that we need to do on each side. So I'm gonna set this aside for now, and then I'm gonna bring out my 14 gauge wire, and this will be a lot easier to manage. And now we're gonna do the same thing to each vein, except we are just gonna go all the way around. So we're not just gonna cut it off on the other side right here, on the other side of the U. We are gonna go all the way around to the other side too. So each vein is in one continuous piece. Okay, I have done the middle vein right here, and it's all in one continuous piece on either side, and the edges have been folded up so it's not poking and stabbing anybody, so woohoo! And now I'm going to repeat this same process on this lower vein right here. Okay, and I just finished the wire on this lower vein right here, and now we're going to combine them all together. So you have the middle vein and then the outer frames. So now we are going to put them all together, and we are going to take our electrical tape and we're going to start wrapping it around the U from up here, down here to over here. And then we're also going to combine it at this point right here. We're going to wrap it around just to make sure that everything is nice and in place. Now that is all tied together. You can also add the electrical wire along this as well. And now we're gonna work on these 3 pieces, 24, 25, 26, wing 1, wing 2, and wing 3. I'm gonna set aside wing 3 for now. I'm gonna take wing 1 and 2. So matching these notches right here together, we are gonna pin wrong sides together and then sew down 1/2 of an inch. All right, I will be right back. So I've sewn those two together, and I just put the frame guide down again because these two pieces are very similar to the color of the table. So we're gonna go with that for now. And now we're gonna bring out wing 3. 26 is going to go on this side with the double notches right here. And we're going to pin it again, wrong sides together, matching the notches. And we are gonna sew down a 1/2 inch again. And now those are all sewn together, and now we have the right side up and the seam is sticking up. That is right, don't worry about that. And now we will trim it down to about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less, and then we will press it open with the iron. Okay, so on both of the wings, I have trimmed these seams down to about 1/4 of an inch, a little bit less than that, and then I pressed it open, and I have also added a stay stitch about 3/8 of an inch all the way on the top here. And now I'm going to take 1/2 of an inch bias tape, and I am going to pin it down on each of these seams. So this seam and this seam as well. And then we're going to edge stitch on each side so that we cover up the seam. And then we'll repeat it on the other wing. Bias is all sewn on to these 4 veins, and I have trimmed off the edges to make sure it matches the raw edge. I've also run a stay stitch on the bottom here, 1/2 of an inch all the way along it. And now using that 1/2 inch stitch, we are going to do a narrow hem. So fold 1/4 of an inch and then fold again 1/4 of an inch. So we folded 1/4 of an inch twice towards the wrong side, and then press it down. Now you're going to stitch along the inner edge of that fold, and doing so on the bias might be a little bit difficult, but just do the best that you can. I'm going to do the best that I can, so let's do it. Okay, so I have both of those sewn, and just a note, pressing with an iron and adding steam works wonders if your fabric can handle that. I'm going to take more bias tape, surprise, surprise. That is about 1 inch more than this upper part of the wing, including this angle right here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be attaching the bias tape over the top raw edge. So we are going to pin this on the outside where the bias channels are facing towards you, and we're going to pin it starting right there, all the way up here, raw edge to raw edge, up here, over here, and all the way down to the end. So when you sew, you are going to sew right in this first groove right here all the way up. You're going to sew all the way up here, but once you get to the bias channels, you are going to stop stitching right here, back stitch, and then you're going to start again right here, reinforcing the stitch, and then sew all the way down. This just helps because we are going to be inserting the wire into these channels, and it's nice when the sewing is not blocking them. Yay, they're looking like wings now. Right, that bias tape is sewn on from all the way down here, up here, allowing this space to be open, and then all the way over here, allowing some space off the edge so we can fold it. So with these 2 smaller veins, I'm going to slip these into these 2 channels right here, and I'm going to make sure that I slip it into the bias so it does not show on the outside right here. And now what we're going to do is we are going to flip this over the top of the frame, and we are going to pin it on the other side, so the wrong side. And I'm going to flip it over so it's easier to see. And at this edge right here, you're going to fold it in like that, and then down, and then fold the bias tape. So I've got all that pinned, and you can either machine stitch it right along here, but it might be hard for you to do it down here with the multiple wires. So I'd recommend perhaps hand stitching it. I'll probably slip stitch it, and especially right here, you will slip stitch this on both sides, this side and the other side. And don't worry too much about down here if the bias tape doesn't fit over all of the wire, because we will be adding more electrical tape to close up that end there. So here are the finished wings. Awesome work. And obviously these wings can be transformed into vampire wings, dragon wings, whatever you'd like. And if you'd like to add any trims or any appliques to it, that is great. Go ahead, just make sure it's not too heavy so it doesn't weigh down the wings. But I'm so excited to see what it looks like with the dress.